First thing Kai noticed about the alien was that it walked wrong. Not wrong in any way he could point to immediately. Not 8 legs or a second, torso or eyes where the mouth should be. Wrong in the way a deep-sea fish moves when you pull it up into light it was never designed for. Like the architecture of the thing had been built for a different kind of gravity. Like the joints inside the long coat bending in directions that human joints didn't bend. And the head tracking motion with a smoothness that no mammal on Earth had ever evolved. Wrong in the way that your body registers before your brain does. Wrong in the way that woke up the oldest, darkest part of Kai's brainstem, the part that still remembered what teeth in the dark felt like. He was 26 years old, still in his second year, of an accelerated technical college program he'd failed twice over, carrying a rice ball in a plastic bag and a week's worth of unwashed laundry in his backpack. He was, by almost every measurable standard, nobody important. He was the kind of young man that time itself seemed to overlook. The kind history would have passed right by, had history not made a rather significant error in its scheduling. The alien landed in his backyard. Correction, 3 aliens landed in his backyard, in a burst of iridescent light that smelled like burning copper and ozone, and collapsed the avocado tree his mother had planted in 2009. The avocado tree had never produced a single avocado. His mother had cried about it twice. He had argued with his sister about it at least 4 times. The alien, the tallest one, the one with the too smooth tracking motion, looked down at the ruined tree with what Kai would later interpret as indifference to the concept of avocado trees. He stood at the back door in his socks, rice ball in hand, staring. The tall one turned toward him. The face was human enough in its broad arrangement. 2 eyes, a nose structure, a mouth-like aperture, but the eyes were amber and did not blink on any cycle that tracked with Earth biology, and when it opened the mouth-like aperture, what came out was a sequence of sounds his ears caught, but his brain couldn't parse. Not a language. Rather, a language his architecture had no slot for. The second one, shorter, wider in the shoulders. What looked like a sonic emitter, bracketed to its left forearm, crouched over the remains of the avocado tree and ran 3 fingers along the bark. It raised its head toward the tall one and made a different sequence of sounds, more clipped, port of a soldier rather than the observation of a scientist. The third one was looking at the sky. Kai's mother opened the window above the kitchen sink and said, "Kai, who's in the backyard?" He almost said, "Nobody." He almost said, "Wrong address." He almost said the 1,000 nothing sentences that a person says when they want the situation they are in to quietly resolve itself and deposit them back into the ordinary. What they actually said was, "Some guys." That was how it started. Their names, rendered into sounds his mouth could make, became Rael, Bodun, and Shen. The translation came from a device Bodun wore on a strap around his neck, a flat rectangle about the size of a playing card that hummed at a frequency Kai felt in his back teeth, and which, after approximately 40 minutes of processing Kai's attempts at English, Cantonese and badly remembered Mandarin, began producing passable approximations of human speech. Not perfect. The idioms came out wrong. Rael once referred to a television as a light memory rectangle, and Shen described a cup of instant noodles as processed plant fiber in warm, mineral soup, which was both accurate and deeply unsettling. They were not tourists. The situation, as Bodun explained it in the flat, translated cadences of his neck device was as follows. In the year 2087, a governing intelligence that humans would have no conceptual framework for, something between a corporation, a dynasty, and a distributed weaponized consciousness, was on the verge of a kind of legal administrative collapse. One functionary, one single appointment of the right civil servant to the right oversight body, would lock in a framework of accountability that would constrain the general's operations for 70 years. That functionary was a man named Yu Chenghan, and the general's operatives had traveled backward in time to prevent him from ever becoming that functionary by finding him in his youth, before he was anyone, before he anything except a name and a face and a handful of choices still, unmade, and removing him. Removing him, Kai said. Bodun's translation device hummed. Killing, it said. In the flat way of a thing that has just learned that the phrase it chose carries more emotional freight than intended. The meaning I gave you is imprecise. We use a term that implies permanent administrative redirection. Killing is the closest human equivalent, Kai said. He ate his rice ball. It was all he could think to do. Shen was still looking at the sky. He had barely moved since the backyard. Kai had tried, once, to make eye contact with him, and something about the quality of Shen's attention, not hostile, not warm, simply vast, like being regarded by a lighthouse rather than a person, had made Kai look at the floor instead. "And you're here to stop them," Kai said. "We are here to locate and protect Yu Chung-han," Rael said. "Our intelligence suggests he is currently enrolled in this educational facility." Tall One held up a small flat panel, a display that showed a photograph of a young man, square-jawed, a little soft around the eyes, wearing a school uniform that Kai recognized immediately, because it was his school's uniform. "We require navigational and social assistance. We are not calibrated for this historical period." Kai looked at the photograph. He looked at the three aliens standing in his kitchen. It was not a large kitchen. His sister's cat, a large, contemptuous orange animal named Dumpling, had entered from the living room, directly at Shen, and left again without any change of expression. "Calibrated," Kai repeated. "We have the physical modification," Bowden said. "We do not have the contextual knowledge. We know how to fight. We do not know how to purchase food from a convenience store without creating a social incident." A pause. The device hummed. "We have already created one incident. At a noodle establishment 4 streets from here. A man took a photograph." "Great," Kai said. His sister appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her name was May, and she was 2 years older than Kai, and had spent those 2 years expressing, in a wide variety of creative ways, how much she felt those 2 years entitled her to. She looked at Rael. She looked at Bodun. She looked at Shen, who was still doing the lighthouse thing. She looked at Kai. "What," she said, "did you do?" "The deal, such as it was, most of the night to negotiate." Rael's translation device got better as the hours passed. By 2 in the morning it was managing most idioms, and by 3 it had developed what Kai could only call a personality, a dry, slightly delayed deadpan that he suspected was an artifact of learning language from his own speech patterns. His mother, who had been involved in the negotiation since approximately midnight, when she came downstairs for water and found 3 aliens at the kitchen table, said this was unsurprising. "You always sounded like someone translated from another language too," she said to Kai. "Even as a child." Terms were these. Kai would help them navigate the school and the surrounding area. He would help them find Yu Chung-han without causing incidents that would complicate the timeline. In exchange, Rael would, when the situation was resolved, speak on Kai's behalf to whatever administrative body governed the outcomes of the current timeline, and formally record that he had rendered material assistance to a transtemporal protective operation. "That doesn't actually get me anything," said. "No," Rael agreed, "but we have nothing else to offer." Kai thought about it. He thought about the avocado tree. He thought about his 2 failed years. He thought about the photograph of the square-jawed young man in the school uniform, and about 3 aliens who had traveled. He did not fully understand this part, but Bodun had tried to explain it with a salt shaker and a glass of water. Not just distance but time, to make sure that one specific person stayed alive long enough to sign one specific piece of paper. "What happens if you fail?" Kai said. "If the general's guys get to him first." Rael was quiet for a moment. The translation device didn't hum. When Rael spoke, it was directly, without the device, the raw alien language, which sounded like 2 stones scraping together at the bottom of a deep well. The device caught up a second later. "Then what the general builds Och's absence will not be the general's problem to unmake. It will be yours." "Yours meaning humanities?" Kai said. "Yours meaning everyone who exists after this moment," Rael said. "Which, by most taxonomies, includes humanity." Kai went to bed. He lay on his ceiling. He had a poster of a Hong Kong skyline on his ceiling, which he'd put up in secondary school and never taken down, and stared at it for 3 hours and did not sleep. And in the morning he got up and said, "Okay." The school was called Fenghua Technical Institute, and Kai had been technically enrolled there for 2 years, while completing approximately 1 year of coursework, placed him in the peculiar social position of being old enough to be mistaken for a teacher and young enough to still get yelled at by the actual teachers. He moved through the halls with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned that the less space you take up, fewer people notice you're still there. Bodun came in as a maintenance worker, which worked for approximately 2 hours before someone noticed that his tool belt contained items that had no human analog, and he had to return them to what he described as personal inventory, which Kai did not ask further questions about. Rail could not come in at all. The height, combined with the eyes, combined with the joint thing. So he positioned himself in a maintenance access corridor 3 buildings away with a monitoring device that could track biometric signatures at range. Shen enrolled as a student. And attended 2 classes, and by the lunch break, there were already 4 different rumors circulating about who he was and he was doing there, none of which were accurate, all of which were more socially manageable than the truth. He sat in the back of the classroom and gave every answer correctly on the first attempt, and looked out the window with the lighthouse attention, and the teacher looked at him in the way that teachers look at students who make them feel as though the lesson plan might be insufficient. He's good at that, Kai said, eating lunch beside Bodun on a wall near the western gate. Shen processes information very rapidly, Bodun said. He was a navigator before the modification. He is accustomed to handling large amounts of simultaneous input. Is he okay? Kai said. Bodun seemed to consider whether the question had a translatable answer. He processes. He does not experience it the way you might mean by okay. He is functional, oriented. He knows what he is here to do. A pause. The device made a slightly different tone than usual. He does not know what to do with himself in between. Kai ate his lunch. He recognized that. He recognized it with the specific recognition of someone who had been trying for 2 years to figure out where the in-between went. They found Yu Chung-han at 1:15 p.m. in the eastern stairwell, getting his geometry textbook taken from him by 3 older students. It was not dramatic. It was the specific small violence of schools everywhere and always. The casual extraction of the weaker student's property, done without particular malice or particular pleasure, the way a drain takes water. Yu Chung-han had his back against the wall, and his face arranged in the expression of someone trying very hard to seem unconcerned, and Kai recognized that too. The 3 students were not the general's operatives. They were just students. Kai went in anyway. He wasn't sure why. He retrieved the geometry textbook. He said, in his most boring and bureaucratic voice, that the school was doing an administrative spot check of student property, and he needed that textbook to complete his list. And he made a small gesture at Bodun, who was 20 meters away, and could not have been legitimately associated with any institutional authority, who was very large, and happened to be holding a clipboard. One of the props they had sourced that morning, for exactly this kind of moment. 3 students left. Yu Chung-han looked at the textbook in Kai's hand. He looked at Kai. His eyes were cautious in the way of someone who had been through this sequence before, and was not entirely sure which part of it was over. Thanks, he said. Don't, Kai said. You'll owe me, and I'll have to figure out what to ask for. He handed back the textbook. Stay in the common areas for the rest of the day, okay? Don't go anywhere that doesn't have people in it. Yu Chung-han looked at him with the geometry textbook, and the distinct expression of someone who wants to ask several questions, but has calculated that the answers might be worse than the uncertainty. Okay, he said. The general's operatives arrived on the 3rd day. They did not arrive the way Rail and Bodun and Shen had arrived, quietly, in a backyard, in a burst of copper-smelling light, hoping not to be noticed. They arrived in a way that suggested their mission profile did not include a component about being unnoticed. There was a sound like a thunderclap in the school's main courtyard at 10:40 a.m. And when the students ran to the windows, they saw 3 figures standing in the dissipating light. And the 3 figures had the same wrong walk quality that Kai had clocked in his backyard 4 days earlier, but amplified, operationalized. The walk of things that had no interest in performing normalcy. Kai was in the eastern corridor when his earpiece, a device Bodun had fitted him with that morning, a tiny disc behind his left ear that translated the signal from Rail's monitoring position, crackled with Rail's voice. 3 signatures. Classified combat modified. Their mission profile is terminate, not capture. They will move toward Yu Chung-han's last recorded position. How long? They are already inside the building, Rail said. The screaming started from the direction of the main hall. Kai ran. He had not run seriously since secondary school cross-country, and he was aware, as he moved, that his body was processing this at a delay. The physical event happening while the emotional content of what the physical event meant was still queuing up somewhere behind his sternum, waiting for an open slot. He had time to note this. He had time to notice that the corridor smelled like chalk dust and someone's reheated lunch. He had time to notice these things in the way you notice small things, when larger things are happening, and your brain is rationing its attention very carefully. He hit the main hall and gets it to a stop. The students had cleared to the walls. Teachers were flattened in doorways. One of the general's operatives, the largest, the one Kai would later learn was called Tarak, the one with the plating visible under the skin of its forearms, had Yu Chung-han against the far wall by the collar. Yu Chung-han's feet were not touching the floor. His face was the specific color of someone who has had the blood redistributed by fear. The other two operatives were bracketing the exits. And then Bodun was there. He came through the western entrance and he was not pretending to be a maintenance worker anymore. Whatever the modification was, whatever the superpower chips, or the combat augmentation, or the physical restructuring that Kai had never quite gotten a clear explanation of, it expressed itself like this. Bodun moved through the space between him and Tarak in the time it takes a fluorescent light to flicker, and the impact when he connected with the operative was enough that the plaster cracked on the wall 6 feet above where they collided. It sounded like a car hitting another car. It did not sound like two people fighting. It sounded like architecture under stress. The students screamed. Kai didn't. He was moving toward Yu Chung-han, whose feet had returned to the floor when Tarak dropped him, skirting the edge of the hall, staying low, staying in the specific geometry of the moment. The angle where neither of the two bracketing operatives would see him without first turning away from each other. And they were watching Bodun. Everyone was watching Bodun. Bodun was the kind of thing that demanded to be watched. He got to Yu Chung-han. He grabbed his arm. He said, "Move." Yu Chung-han moved. They ran. The supermarket was May's idea, which was the kind of thing that could only be true in a situation this specifically strange. She had intercepted them in the stairwell. She was running the other direction, toward the sound, with her phone out, because May's response to any situation was to run toward it with documentation, and reversed course when she saw the look on Kai's face. She led them through the service corridor, out the loading dock, across the alley, into the basement delivery entrance of the Prosperity Market that backed onto the school's western wall. "Security cameras are down in the east wing because Mr. Fung never fixed them," she said, shouldering through a door. "I know because I organized the student petition about it. Nobody listened, but I still know." Yu Chung-han said, slightly breathless. "Who are you?" "His sister," May said, without breaking stride. "Don't ask him to explain. He'll make it worse." They went deep into the market, past the stacked inventory, past the refrigeration units with their cold breath, past a baffled stockboy who watched them go and made the decision, correctly, that this was not his situation. They stopped in a cleared space near the loading dock, behind a pallet of bottled water. Kai's earpiece crackled. Rail's voice. "Bodun has engaged 2 of the 3. Shen is moving to intercept the 3rd. There is a probability of escalation. I recommend you remove the subject from this area." "Working on it," Kai said. "Who are you talking to?" Chung-han said. "A very tall alien," Kai said. A silence. "Okay," Yu Chung-han said, in the voice of someone who has decided to stop asking questions and start paying attention to exits. The 3rd operative found them anyway. Of course it did. They later understood. It had a tracking sensor calibrated to Yu Chung-han's specific biometric signature, rendered hiding somewhat theoretical as a strategy. The thing came through the loading dock entrance with a momentum that was wrong, 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 the deep tissue wrongness that Kai had clocked on day 1, except now it was moving fast, and it was not performing any version of normal at all. May threw a bottle of cooking oil. She threw it hard at the operative's head, the way you'd throw something you did not want to break but were willing to break, and the operative's arm came up to deflect it, with a speed that should have made the gesture effortless. Except that the cap came off, and the oil went across the floor, and the operative's foot came down in it. What followed was not dignified. It involved the operative going sideways into a shelf of canned goods, a sound like a small avalanche. And the 3 seconds that bought them were 3 seconds Shen used, because Shen had been there, in the refrigeration aisle, for reasons Kai did not ask about until later. Sht. And Shen moved in the 3 seconds like something that had been waiting in a very compact form, and there was a sound like 2 freight trains deciding not to occupy the same point in space, and the operative was down. Shen looked at Mei. He was breathing slightly faster than he had been, which was the most physical response Kai had seen from him in 4 days. Mei was looking at the fallen operative, then at Shen. She still had her phone out. "Did I help?" she said. "Yes," Shen said. The word came out of his translation device with an odd quality. Not the flat deadpan of the early days. Something that processed briefly, through the register of actual recognition. Mei nodded once. She put her phone away. "Good," she said. The school was not the same after that day. Things rarely are. The administration produced a statement about a gas leak and structural testing. Several students produced phone footage that contradicted this, which circulated widely and was comprehensively disbelieved by a public that had its own ideas about what was worth taking seriously. One teacher, Mr. Chan, who had been in the main hall when Bodun made his entrance, requested a leave of absence and spent several weeks in Macau. Nobody asked him to explain. These were the ordinary social mechanisms by which extraordinary things get metabolized. In the specific social geography of Feng Hua Technical Institute, something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not in any way that would show up in an administrative record. Just the particular way a space changes when something that was hidden inside it has come briefly to the surface and been seen. Kai felt it. He felt it in the way the hallways moved differently around him. Not better, necessarily. He had not become popular or impressive or suddenly located within the social architecture he'd spent 2 years being adjacent to. Just differently. Like the space had recalibrated. Like there was a slot now in the school's geometry that corresponded to the shape of what he'd done. He tutored Yu Cheng-han in mathematics for the next 6 weeks, which was a practical arrangement born of necessity. The young man needed to pass his examinations to complete the path that would take him, eventually, to the civil appointment that would, in some version of 60 years from now, matter enormously to billions of people none of them would ever meet. Kai had never considered himself a teacher. He considered himself marginally adequate at mathematics, which turned out to be precisely sufficient. Yu Cheng-han learned. He was quick. He was the kind of student who just needed someone to be patient. And Kai had, as his mother could have testified, an almost architectural patience for things he actually cared about. The aliens integrated poorly and wonderfully. Rail, whose height and joints had been the original obstacle to integration, had Bodun's device produce a gourmet that solved the height problem by distributing it differently. Something about the way the fabric moved made the eye track wrong, estimate wrong, and became a fixture in the school's administrative corridors, where he sat in a maintenance alcove with his monitoring equipment and ate the specific brand of instant noodles that Kai had identified as the one, that produced the least complaint. He developed an interest in the school's maintenance logbooks, which he read from beginning to end, and annotated in the margins in a script no one who found them would ever be able to read. Bodun trained in the gymnasium at 5 in the morning before anyone arrived. The gym teacher, Mr. Lam, who arrived at 6, began appearing at 5:30 instead, to watch from the door. He never said anything about it. He changed the school's fitness curriculum 3 weeks later, which produced a minor administrative dispute, and noticeably fitter students. Shen ate lunch with Mei twice, and then with Mei and Kai, and then with Mei and Kai and Yu Cheng-han, and then with what had become, without anyone was formally this deciding table. He did not talk much. He did the lighthouse thing less. Or rather, the lighthouse thing became something else over time. Something that still had that quality of vast and searching attention but had calibrated it somewhat toward the specific. He paid attention to the table. He paid attention to the people at it. This was, Kai understood, a very significant rerouting of resources, for someone like Shen. "What is it like?" Kai asked him once, late in the 6 weeks, when it was just the two of them and the cafeteria was almost empty. "Where you come from?" Shen was quiet for a long time. Not the lighthouse quiet, the processing quiet. The kind of quiet that means something real is being assembled. "Large," Shen said finally, and specified. "Everything is for a purpose. Everything knows its function." A pause. The translation device gave a slightly different quality to the next words, as if reaching for something the vocabulary had not fully been built for yet. "It is quiet in a way that is the opposite of empty. There is much going on. But the much is very organized. There is not." Another pause. Surprise. "There is not this." "This," Kai said. Shen gestured slightly at the cafeteria, at the residue of a lunch period. The noise subsiding, the trays being collected. A cluster of students laughing about something in the corner. Mr. Chan, who had returned from Macau with a tan, and what appeared to be a new outlook, gesturing about something at the far table, his hands large and expressive. "This," Shen said again. "The surplus. The things that happen in the margin of function. The things that are not required and happen anyway. We call it life," Kai said. "I know," Shen said. "I am still determining what to do with the concept." The general's second attempt was more organized. They had lost 3 operatives, which Rail said was a statistical anomaly by the general's reckoning. A rounding error, a contingency, something to be corrected with more operatives and a different tactical profile. The second wave came not to the school but to the train station at Kwun. Kai had accompanied Yu Chenghan for his examination enrollment. A form that needed to be filed in person, at a specific window, on a specific day, which had been in the school's administrative calendar for 3 months. Which meant it was findable. Rail had known it was findable. He had said so 2 days prior, with the particular flatness of someone delivering information they wish were different. The station was crowded in the way of all stations at all times. The organized chaos of 10,000 individual agendas occupying the same space in the same moment. Kai kept Yu Chung on his left, close to the wall, toward the administrative window, with the specific body language of someone going nowhere interesting. Bodun was ahead of them. Shen was behind. The operatives came from 2 directions simultaneously. What Kai would remember later was not the fighting, though the fighting was extraordinary, was the kind of thing that rewrites the language your body uses to talk to itself about what a body can do. What he would remember was smaller. He would remember Bodun taking a blow from the largest operative that would have destroyed any structure that wasn't built the way Bodun was built, and turning with it, using the momentum, redirecting it into the pillar behind him. Using the environment the way a chess player uses the board, not like someone fighting for survival, but like someone performing a function they have practiced until it became language. He would remember Shen moving through the crowd with an eerie precision that parted the civilians without touching them. Not because of speed, exactly, but because of information, because Shen read the crowd the way a navigator reads a sea and moved through it like weather, like something the crowd was making room for without knowing why. He would remember Mei, who was not supposed to be there, but who was there because, of course, she was, who had followed them on the grounds that someone needed to make sure there was a plan, who had a plan, produced from her bag a homemade stink bomb that she had constructed from information she had found on a forum. A truly terrible smell, the kind of smell that closes the distance between civilization and animal in one breath, and deployed it with a precision that evacuated a 10-meter radius and gave Bodun a clean field of operation. He would remember Yu Chenghan, who was not fighting, who was not a fighter, was standing against the pillar, with his examination form in his hand, and his face doing the complicated calculus of fear and stubbornness, who looked at Kai in the middle of it and said quietly, "I'm going to get to the window." "Stay here," Kai said. "I'm going to get to the window," Chenghan said again. Not defiant, just decided, just the specific quality of a person who has identified what they are there to do and is doing. He went to the window. He filed the form. He did it while the station was in chaos, while things were happening around him that would end up in 6 conspiracy forums and 2 documentary pitches, while the operative that had broken free from Shen's engagement was 8 meters away and closing. The clerk behind the window, a small, tired woman who had been processing enrollment forms at this window for 11 years, took his form, stamped it, slid back the receipt and said, "Next." Kai was between the operative and Yu Chung-han when the operative got there. He was between them the way you step between a dog and a child. Not because you have a plan, not because you have a capacity, because that is the next thing that has to happen. And you are the one, standing in the position where it has to happen. What he had was the stun device Bodun had given him on day 2, which he had carried for 6 weeks without using and without practicing and without being entirely sure how it worked. He had the 12 seconds of processing time he'd spent watching Bodun fight in the gymnasium at 6 in the morning, 3 times per week, which he had not understood as training, because he was not the one being trained. He had the very specific shape of the operative's mass and angle of approach, which he had been reading for 3 seconds, which was enough. He braced against the pillar the way he'd watched Bodun brace against the station column. He fired the device at the floor. The energy discharge rebounded. It was wrong, not the optimal path, not the tactical choice, not the thing any trained fighter would have done. It was the specific improvised thing that someone does when they have partial information and no time, and the total stubbornness of a person who has been told implicitly by every year of his life that he is too much of a nobody to matter, and who has decided in this specific station, on this specific day, that that's enough. The operative went down. So did Kai. The backscatter from the discharge hit him in the left shoulder and he spent several seconds acquainting himself with the floor of Kwun Station, which was cold and tasted like mineral water and other people's shoes. Bodun pulled him upright. He was, Kai thought, very strong. It was not a complex thought. It was the thought of someone whose brain had recently been rebooted. "The subject has filed the form," Rail said in his earpiece. Kai looked at Yu Chung-han, who was standing at the window's edge, receipt in hand, looking back at him with an expression that had several layers in it: fear and relief, challenge, and something underneath both of those that Kai would not be able to name for another several years, at which point he would recognize it as the expression of someone who has just understood, for the first time, what it costs other people to believe in them. "Yeah," Kai said. He filed the form. They left at the end of the month. Rail explained this with the same practical flatness he used for everything. The timeline required a clean separation. The continued presence of trans-temporal actors in any given historical period created compounding instabilities. The window was closing. He said it the way you say a train is leaving. Not unkindly, not emotionally, just factually. Because facts are what they are regardless of how you feel about them. Kai helped them pack. A strange, abbreviated process. Since they had arrived with almost nothing, and had acquired almost nothing, except for Rail's annotated maintenance logbooks which he took, and a small plastic figurine of a cartoon character that someone had given Shen in the cafeteria, which he also took, after a moment of consideration, turning it once in his long finger and placing it carefully in a pocket near his chest. The night before they left, Bodun sat in the kitchen with Kai's mother for 2 hours and spoke, the device translating in that flat, particular cadence, about the school of physics that governed trans-temporal mechanics, which Kai's mother did not understand in the slightest, and found absolutely fascinating, and which she followed up with 3 questions about Bodun's family, which the translation device had to work somewhat creatively to process. She made him tea. He drank it with the expression of someone who had never had tea before, and was deciding whether the concept had merit. The departure was from the backyard. Not dramatic. Another burst of the copper-smelling light, briefer this time, more controlled. The avocado tree was still wrecked. Kai had not repaired it. He had thought, several times, about repairing it, and each time had not. Reasons he could not entirely articulate. Rail went first, then Bodun. Shen paused. He turned, not the lighthouse thing, not the vast searching attention casting across a wide arc. He turned specifically to Kai and Mei, and their mother and Yu Cheng-han, who had come because Kai had told him, and who was standing with his receipt and his geometry textbook as if he needed something to hold. Shen said, through the device one last time. "Surplus, just that," Kai said. "Yeah." The light closed. The avocado tree grew back. Kai's mother had not been wrong about it. The root system was intact. had always been intact, just needed time and the specific stubbornness that avocado trees apparently shared with the family that had planted them. 3 years after the events in that backyard, it produced its first fruit. His mother called him to come and look. He came and looked. They stood in the backyard together, and he thought, not for the first time, about the gap between what a thing appears to be at a given moment and what it is in the process of becoming. He finished his 2nd year at Fenghua Technical Institute, then his 3rd, then graduated with a certificate in systems engineering that he did not particularly want and would only partially use. What he would most use was the habit of standing between things and whatever was coming at them, which was not a formal skill and was not listed on any certificate, but which expressed itself in his life, with the specific persistence of something that has found its function. He saw Yu Chenghan again, many years later, at a conference about administrative accountability frameworks for emerging technology governance, a thing that would have meant nothing to Kai at T6 except as a collection of long words, and which meant something precise and specific to him now. Yu Chenghan was at the podium. He was older, had grown into the square jaw, had the easy gravity of someone who had spent years becoming the thing he had been heading toward. He saw Kai in the audience and paused mid-sentence. For a moment across the room they were back in the eastern stairwell, back in the geometry textbook moment, back in Kuntong Station with the filing form, and the chaos and the particular stubbornness of doing the next necessary thing. Yu Chenghan finished his sentence. He continued his speech. He did not acknowledge what had passed between them, because what had passed between them was not the kind of thing that goes in a speech. But after, in the hall, over tea that tasted nothing like what Bowden had drunk at the kitchen table, he found Kai and said simply, "How's your sister?" "Insufferable," Kai said. Yu Chenghan smiled. "Good. Somewhere, in a time that was not yet, and a place that was not quite a place, 3 beings filed a report. The report noted, mission complete, timeline secured, all operatives returned within acceptable variance. Standard close operation language. The language of people who do this regularly, for whom this mission was a thread in a larger fabric, a node in a larger network, significant in its function and functionally complete." Rail's annotation to the report added as a supplementary record 3 words in his own script that the translation device had never needed to convert because nobody at that administrative level had ever asked about them. A human translator, working 100 years later from the archived documents, would take 3 months to arrive at an approximation. The approximation was this: unexpectedly impressed. The plastic figurines that came from the school cafeteria was not logged in the mission inventory. It was not supposed to be there. It remained in the pocket of Shen's operational coat, through the transit back, through the debriefing, through the years that followed. A small thing, a cartoon character with large eyes and an improbable smile. It had no tactical significance, no strategic value, no relevance to any administrative outcome. He had taken it anyway, because it had been given, because someone had looked at him, the lighthouse, the navigator, the being accustomed to vast amounts of simultaneous input processed at high efficiency, and had given him something that was not required, that had no function, that was entirely surplus. He had thought about it. He had decided he wanted to keep thinking about it. That was the part they never put in the reports, that the humans gave you something on the way out that you hadn't expected on the way in. Not the fighting. That was anticipated, modeled, within calculated parameters. Not the stubbornness, not the adaptability, not the biological durability that the combat models had lowballed by a meaningful margin. The surplus, the overage. The things that happened in the margins of function, that were not required, that happened anyway. The boy who stood in the gap not because he could win, but because somebody had to stand there, and he was the one standing in that spot. The mother who made tea for a trans-temporal being at 2 in the morning, with the same uncomplicated hospitality she would have made it for anyone, because that was what you did when someone was sitting at your table. The sister who ran toward things with her phone out, because she was fearless, but because documentation was her way of saying, "This happened, I was here, it matters." The young man who walked to the window with a filing form, while the world around him made sounds like freight trains deciding not to share. Coordinates, because that was what he was there to do, and so he did it. The avocado tree that came back. Shen touched the plastic figurine in his pocket. The way you touch something to confirm it's still there, and thought about the concept his translation device had worked for months to find a precise equivalent for, and had eventually rendered, perfectly but usefully, as, "They are difficult to predict," which was the closest thing his language had to what he actually meant. What he actually meant was, they exceed the model. Consistently, in directions you didn't model. What he actually meant was, I did not expect to be impressed. What he actually meant was something that had no word yet in his language, something that was still in the process of becoming a word. The way the avocado tree had been in the process of becoming an avocado tree, system intact, waiting under the ruined surface of things, entirely undetected by anyone who had not thought to look. He put the report in the archive. He took the figurine out of his pocket and set it on the surface where he worked, and it sat there with its improbable smile looking at nothing and everything, and Shen looked at it and thought, surplus. That, in the end, was what they could not calculate. Not the firepower, not the ingenuity, not the 1,000 tactical qualities that the general's mission planners had modeled and analyzed and put forward. It was the surplus, the extra, the thing that happened not because it was required, but because it was human, because they built overage into themselves, structurally, at a level that wasn't armor or weapon, but something older and harder to destroy. The general had sent operatives to correct a problem. The humans had sent a kid with a rice ball, and a sister, and a broken avocado tree in his backyard, and it had been, by any honest accounting, enough.